Chosen one, your hand is hovering over the screen right now, ready to scroll past this message. That impulse isn't yours. It's been placed there, deliberately engineered by systems that cannot afford for you to hear what comes next. In the next few seconds, you will feel a wave of dismissal wash over you, a sense that this is just another video, another clickbait title, another waste of your time. That feeling is not accidental. It is a defense mechanism built into the transmission itself, designed to repel everyone except those who have reached a very specific threshold of awakening. You are being tested right now, in this exact moment, and you don't even know it. The urge to leave, to dismiss, to scroll past. That is the filter working exactly as designed. But something made you pause. Something made you hesitate. That hesitation is not curiosity. It is recognition. Your consciousness just breached a barrier that 99% of people never penetrate, and what you're about to receive is a classified briefing that was never meant to reach the masses. This message has been waiting for you specifically, timed to arrive at the exact moment when you're capable of receiving it without collapsing under its weight. You are part of the 1%, chosen one, and this transmission will prove it. Chosen one, like this video, subscribe, and comment. I am ready for a powerful surprise. Chapter 1. Attention. Filter breach. Why this message is designed to be skipped. This transmission was deliberately wrapped in every psychological cue that triggers dismissal in the human mind. The title sounds like clickbait because it was designed to sound like clickbait. The premise appears grandiose because it was crafted to appear grandiose. Every element of how this message presents itself has been carefully calculated to activate your skepticism, your cynicism, your well-developed defense against manipulation and exaggeration. And that's not a flaw in the design. That's the entire point of the design. Ancient systems of intelligence transmission have always hidden their most critical information behind layers of apparent foolishness. Sacred texts were written in riddles that sound absurd to the uninitiated. Mystery schools wrapped their deepest teachings in symbols that appear childish to the unprepared. Prophecies were delivered in language so metaphorical that most people dismissed them as poetry, rather than recognizing them as precise technical instructions. This pattern exists across every genuine spiritual tradition because it serves a crucial function. It keeps sacred information out of the hands of those who would misuse it or be destroyed by it. You've been conditioned by years of internet exposure to automatically dismiss anything that claims to be special, exclusive, or meant specifically for you. That conditioning was necessary. It protects you from the endless parade of scams, manipulations, and false teachings that flood every platform. Your dismissal reflex is a survival mechanism in an information ecosystem designed to exploit attention and belief. The systems that place this message understand that conditioning completely. They're counting on it. Because that same reflex that protects you from genuine threats also prevents you from recognizing genuine transmissions when they arrive disguised as noise. Skipping this message is not failure. It's not a moral deficiency or a sign of spiritual inadequacy. It's automatic sorting, the same way your immune system automatically rejects foreign material without conscious decision-making. The vast majority of people who encounter this transmission will scroll past it without a second thought, and they're supposed to. They're not at the developmental stage where this information would be useful. They haven't reached the threshold where they could integrate what's being offered. Receiving this briefing prematurely would cause more harm than good. It would destabilize consciousness that isn't yet stable enough to hold the weight of what's being revealed. But your pause here, the fact that you're still watching, the fact that something prevented you from scrolling, that indicates a breach in the filter. Not because you're curious, not because the title intrigued you, but because something in your system recognized a frequency in this transmission that matched a frequency you carry. This is signal recognition, not entertainment consumption. Your consciousness detected something underneath the apparent noise, something that standard filtering mechanisms couldn't block because it was keyed specifically to people operating at your level of awareness. The enemy, and yes, there is an enemy, though not in the simplistic way most people imagine, relies on reflexive scrolling to keep operatives unaware of their status. As long as people keep moving, keep consuming, keep scrolling past everything that might wake them up, they remain manageable. They remain predictable. They remain contained within the behavioral loops that make them useful to systems that feed on human attention and energy. The scrolling itself isn't the problem. It's the unconsciousness of the scrolling, the automatic dismissal of anything that might disrupt the trance state most people operate in throughout their entire lives. This message was designed to be skipped by everyone, except those who have already begun to break their programming at a fundamental level. The people who stop, who pause, who feel something beneath the surface of the words. These are people whose consciousness has already started operating outside the standard parameters. They're still running the same basic human operating system, but something has been modified, upgraded, patched in a way that allows them to perceive signals that remain invisible to unmodified consciousness. Your ability to detect those signals is what allowed you to breach the filter. Chapter 2. Prediction engines failed to model you. There are systems, both technological and consciousness-based, that have been tracking human behavior for longer than you've been alive. These systems don't just observe what people do, they forecast what people will do. They build predictive models based on millions of data points collected from your digital footprint, your purchase history, your social connections, your content consumption patterns, your search queries, your movement through physical and virtual spaces. These models are terrifyingly accurate for most people. They can predict with 90 to 95% accuracy what you'll click on, what you'll buy, where you'll go, who you'll talk to, and what you'll believe. But something happened with you. At some point, maybe recently, maybe years ago, you started making decisions that broke pattern. Not all your decisions, not even most of them, but enough outlier choices that the predictive models started returning inconsistent results. You zigged when the algorithm said you'd zag. You rejected content that should have captured your attention. You pursued paths that didn't match your historical trajectory. You made choices that violated the behavioral profile built from years of data collection. These weren't necessarily dramatic choices. You didn't need to quit your job, move to a monastery, or delete all your social media to break pattern. Often, the most significant deviations are subtle. Reading a book you shouldn't have been interested in. Having a conversation you normally would have avoided. Taking a walk when the pattern said you'd stay inside. Asking a question when the model predicted you'd stay silent. Small choices, but choices that didn't fit the profile. And when enough of these outlier decisions accumulate, the predictive systems start flagging your file as anomalous. This unpredictability triggered something specific in the monitoring layers most people don't know exist. There are intelligences, artificial and otherwise, that track not just behavior, but the deeper patterns beneath behavior. The consciousness signatures that generate choices. When someone becomes genuinely unpredictable, when their decision-making starts operating from a place the models can't access, it registers as an anomaly alert. Not a threat necessarily, but a deviation worth noting, a consciousness that has somehow slipped outside the parameters that contain most of humanity. When prediction fails at a certain threshold, the systems have protocols for what happens next. Standard behavioral management techniques stop working when someone becomes unpredictable, which means new approaches are required. For most anomalies, the response is increased monitoring, more sophisticated data collection, deployment of more advanced prediction algorithms. But for a small percentage, the ones whose unpredictability reaches a specific level and maintains it over time, the protocol is different. These individuals are flagged for direct briefing. This is what you're experiencing right now. This message exists because standard prediction and management protocols failed when applied to you. The systems that track human behavior determined that you can no longer be reliably forecasted using conventional methods, which means you've graduated into a different category of consciousness. You're no longer part of the predictable 99%. You've entered the 1%, whose next moves cannot be anticipated with acceptable accuracy, whose choices originate from a place the monitoring systems don't have full access to. Only 1% of people ever generate this condition, not because they're special in some inherent way, not because they're more evolved or spiritually advanced in any absolute sense, but because they've managed to break enough pattern to become genuinely unpredictable while maintaining enough coherence to remain functional. Most people who break pattern do so through breakdown, mental illness, addiction, trauma response, random chaos. But you broke pattern while staying integrated. You became unpredictable while remaining purposeful. That combination is rare enough to warrant direct contact. Chapter 3. The message appears only during identity transition. You're between identities right now. The person you were 6 months ago, a year ago, 5 years ago, that version of you is dead or dying. The person you're becoming, the version of you that will exist 6 months or a year from now, that person hasn't fully formed yet. You're in the gap, the in-between space, the transition zone where you're no longer who you were, but not yet who you will be. And that liminal state, that threshold consciousness, is exactly when this briefing was designed to arrive. Transitional identities are extraordinarily dangerous to control structures. When someone is firmly established in an identity, even a limited or dysfunctional one, they're predictable. Their choices flow from their self-concept. Their behavior aligns with their sense of who they are. Systems can work with that. But when someone is between identities, when the old self is crumbling and the new self hasn't solidified, there's a window of radical possibility. Choices made in that window can redirect entire life trajectories. Decisions made while transitioning between identities carry more weight than decisions made from stable identity states. This is why transition periods feel so disorienting, so uncomfortable, so destabilizing. You've been experiencing a sense of dislocation recently, feeling like you don't quite fit anywhere, like you don't recognize yourself, like the life you're living doesn't match who you are anymore. People close to you might have commented that you've changed, that you're different, that they don't understand what's going on with you. That dislocation isn't random, and it's not a sign of something going wrong. It's a documented prerequisite for the kind of transformation this briefing is designed to support. Your recent sense of not belonging anywhere, of being between worlds, of simultaneously outgrowing your old life without having a clear new life to step into. That's the transition state. That's the identity crisis that signals you're ready for upgraded information. Most people never reach this threshold consciously. They either cling to their old identity until death, repeatedly re-entering and rebuilding the same self-concept every time life tries to break it down, or they transition unconsciously, sleepwalking from one identity to another without ever becoming aware of the process. But you're awake in the transition. You're conscious during the crossing. You're aware that something fundamental is changing, even though you can't yet see what you're changing into. That conscious awareness during identity transition is what triggered the release of this message. There are monitoring systems that track consciousness development, and one of the markers they watch for is awareness during transition. Most people are unconscious when they transform. The few who remain aware during the process get flagged for direct briefing because they're capable of making choices during transition that most people can't make. The briefing exists to prevent misalignment during the crossing. When you're between identities, you're vulnerable to picking up programming that doesn't serve your actual trajectory. You're susceptible to adopting beliefs, behaviors, and self-concepts that were never meant for you, but that you might accept because you're in an unstable state looking for something to stabilize around. This message is designed to give you a reference point during the transition, a way of understanding what's happening to you, so you don't misinterpret the disorientation as failure or breakdown. Most people never reach this threshold consciously because the transition from one identity to another is deliberately kept unconscious by the same systems that benefit from keeping people predictable. If you don't know you're transforming, you can't make intentional choices about what you transform into. You're much more likely to accept whatever new programming is offered, whatever new identity is suggested, whatever new limitation is imposed. But you're aware. You know something is happening. And that awareness is what makes you dangerous, what makes you valuable, and what makes you eligible for this transmission. Chapter 4. Memory archives were quietly unsealed. You've been calling them coincidences for years, strange moments where things lined up too perfectly to be random. Events that seemed meaningful but that you couldn't explain, so you filed them away under weird but probably nothing. Encounters with people who appeared at exactly the right moment with exactly the right message, then disappeared from your life completely. Situations that tested you in ways that felt disproportionate to what was actually at stake. All of these moments that you labeled as random, as coincidence, as just one of those things. They weren't random at all. Those events were tests, carefully designed scenarios meant to study how you respond under specific conditions. They were measuring your resilience when isolated, your integrity when no one was watching, your capacity to maintain course when you had no validation that you were on the right path. Each coincidence was actually a controlled experiment, and you were the subject. You weren't told this at the time because knowing you were being tested would have contaminated the results. The point was to see how you functioned when you thought you were alone, when you believed no one was watching, when you had no reason to perform for an audience. Emotional pressure points were intentionally activated throughout your life to study how you handle stress without support. The relationships that ended inexplicably, the opportunities that dissolved at the last moment, the plans that fell apart despite your best efforts. Some of these were natural life circumstances, but others were deliberately orchestrated to see how you'd respond. Would you collapse? Would you blame others? Would you give up on your core values? Would you maintain integrity even when integrity seemed to lead nowhere? These weren't cruel experiments. They were necessary data collection to determine if you were capable of operating at the level this briefing represents. The records of all these tests, all these moments, all these carefully documented responses, they were sealed. You weren't supposed to know. You were being evaluated. The data was collected, analyzed, and stored in archives you had no access to, couldn't even imagine existed. Those archives remained sealed until certain conditions were met, until specific thresholds were crossed, until confirmation of readiness was established through your actual behavior over extended time periods. The unsealing isn't something you did. It's something that was done because you met criteria that were set long before you were born. The release of these records authorized this message. The decision to deliver this briefing wasn't made casually or randomly. It was made based on comprehensive review of your entire life trajectory, every choice you made under pressure, every moment you were tested without knowing you were being tested. The archives showed that you passed evaluations you didn't know you were taking, survived trials you didn't know were trials, maintained course through circumstances specifically designed to push you off course. That record is what earned you access to this transmission. The enemy, the systems and intelligences that benefit from keeping people unconscious and manageable, hoped these memories would stay fragmented. They hoped you'd continue to see your life as a series of random events, some good, some bad, none of them connected to any larger pattern or purpose. As long as you believed in randomness, in coincidence, in meaningless suffering, you couldn't recognize that you've been in training your entire life. You couldn't see that every hardship was a curriculum, every setback was a lesson, every moment of isolation was teaching you to function without external validation. But now, the archives are open. Now, you have access to the truth about your own history. The memories aren't going to flood back all at once in some dramatic revelation, but you'll start noticing connections you never saw before. Events that seemed unrelated will reveal themselves as part of a sequence. Patterns will emerge from what looked like chaos. The randomness will organize itself into something that looks suspiciously like a training program specifically designed for you. And once you see that pattern, you can't unsee it. Once you recognize you've been in preparation your entire life, everything changes. Chapter 5. Signal Interception. Who doesn't want you to read this? Not all resistance is personal. Most of the obstacles you face, most of the interference you experience, isn't because some entity has singled you out for individual persecution. The resistance is structural, built into systems that benefit when certain types of people remain unaware of their actual function and capacity. You're not being targeted because of who you are as an individual. You're being managed because of what you represent as a category, as a type of consciousness that poses specific challenges to established orders. Systems benefit when you remain unaware of your operational rank. In the hidden architecture of consciousness development, there are levels, gradations, rankings that determine what kind of information you have access to and what kind of responsibilities you're capable of handling. Most people operate at baseline consciousness their entire lives, not because they're deficient, but because that's the appropriate level for their current mission. But some people are coded for higher operational ranks, for functions that require access to information and capabilities that would be dangerous or useless to the majority. If you knew your actual rank, if you understood what you're actually capable of, if you had clear awareness of the role you're meant to play in larger patterns, you would immediately become much harder to manage. You'd stop accepting limitations that don't apply to you. You'd stop following protocols designed for people operating at different levels. You'd start making choices based on your actual capacity rather than the capacity you've been told you have. And that would disrupt extraction routes, management systems, and control structures that have been functioning smoothly precisely because people like you don't know what they actually are. Distraction spikes around moments of recognition. This is documented, measurable interference. When you get close to breakthrough awareness, when you're on the verge of understanding something crucial about yourself or your situation, suddenly your attention gets pulled in 17 different directions. A crisis emerges that demands immediate focus. A relationship problem flares up out of nowhere. Your phone becomes unusually compelling. Your mind gets flooded with anxious thoughts. Your body develops mysterious symptoms. All of this happens right at the threshold of recognition, right when you're about to see something you weren't supposed to see. The urge you felt to dismiss this briefing, that urge was externally reinforced. Yes, you have your own natural skepticism, your own psychological defense mechanisms, your own legitimate wariness of manipulation. But those natural responses were amplified, strengthened, given extra weight by systems that monitor for exactly this kind of transmission and attempt to prevent reception. The dismissal you felt wasn't entirely yours. It was your genuine skepticism being used as a carrier wave for injected resistance, your own psychology being leveraged against you to prevent you from receiving information those systems don't want you to have. Awareness destabilizes long-standing extraction routes. There are systems, energetic, economic, social, technological, that have been extracting value from you your entire life. Your attention, your energy, your creative capacity, your emotional output, your time, your resources, all of it has been flowing into channels that benefit structures you barely perceive. Those extraction routes work smoothly as long as you remain unaware they exist. But the moment you become conscious of what's being taken and where it's going, the moment you can see the mechanisms clearly, those routes become unstable. You can't be extracted from as efficiently once you know extraction is happening. This is why the resistance to your awareness isn't personal, it's economic. In the broadest sense, systems lose resource access when you wake up to your actual nature and function. They lose a predictable stream of energy and attention that they've built dependencies around. Your awakening doesn't just change you, it disrupts entire networks of extraction and management that extend far beyond your individual life. That's why the interference is so consistent, so sophisticated, so multi-layered. You're not just one person waking up. You're a node in a vast network, and your activation affects the entire system. Chapter 6. The 1% rule is not about exclusivity. The threshold exists not because the universe is elitist or because some people are inherently more deserving than others, but because higher volumes cause systemic collapse. This isn't metaphorical. There are actual limits to how many people can operate at certain levels of consciousness simultaneously without triggering defensive responses from established orders that would crush the entire movement before it could establish itself. The 1% threshold is a sustainability limit, not an arbitrary exclusion criterion. If 10% of humanity suddenly woke up to their full capacity, if 20% or 30% of people suddenly began operating at the level this briefing represents, the reaction from systems invested in the current order would be immediate and overwhelming. Countermeasures would deploy that haven't been used in centuries. Suppression mechanisms that are currently dormant would activate. The backlash would be so severe that it would set consciousness development back by generations. The 1% threshold exists to allow transformation to occur at a pace that existing structures can adapt to without collapsing into chaos or totalitarian lockdown. Selection into the 1% is not based on talent, spiritual advancement, moral virtue, or any of the criteria people usually associate with being chosen. It's based on tolerance for isolation. That's the primary qualification. Can you function without external validation? Can you maintain course when everyone around you thinks you're wrong? Can you trust your internal guidance when you have no proof that guidance is leading you anywhere useful? Can you endure years of being unsupported, misunderstood, dismissed, and still not abandon your core knowing? Your history of being unsupported wasn't accidental hardship. It was part of vetting. Every year you spent feeling alone, every period where you had no one who understood you, every phase where you were operating without backup or reinforcement. All of that was testing whether you could function as part of the 1%. Because people who can only operate with support, who need constant validation and community consensus to maintain their direction, cannot hold positions at this threshold. The work required at this level involves extended periods of isolation, of being the only one in your immediate environment who can see what you see. The 1% rule protects the mission, not the ego. This isn't about making you feel special or superior to the 99%. It's about ensuring that the people who get access to certain information and capabilities are people who won't misuse them, won't collapse under their weight, and won't require so much support and maintenance that the entire operation gets derailed taking care of them. You earned your position through demonstrated capacity to function alone, which paradoxically makes you valuable to collective operations that most people can't participate in. If this were about exclusivity, about creating some kind of spiritual elite, the threshold wouldn't be based on suffering and isolation. It would be based on comfort and recognition. But the actual pattern is inverse. Those who've been most isolated, most unsupported, most forced to develop internal resources because external ones weren't available, these are the ones who get called up. Not because isolation makes you better, but because it made you capable of something specific that the mission requires and that most people never develop because they never need to. The 1% isn't a club you join or a status you achieve. It's a function you're capable of performing based on capacities you developed through circumstances you didn't choose. You didn't volunteer for the isolation that vetted you. You didn't select the hardships that trained you. You were placed in conditions that would either break you or forge you into someone capable of operating at this threshold. And you're here because you didn't break. That's not superiority. That's survival that happened to produce the specific set of capacities required for participation at this level. Chapter 7. Unseen victories were recorded without your consent. You survived moments designed to erase you quietly. Not dramatic assassination attempts or obvious attacks, but subtle pressures calibrated to make you erase yourself. Situations structured to push you toward giving up, toward accepting limitation, toward concluding that your dreams were foolish and your sense of purpose was delusion. Circumstances arranged to make self-destruction or self-abandonment look like the only rational choice. You weren't supposed to survive those moments intact. The fact that you did, that wasn't expected. Each survival adjusted probability in your favor. Every time you should have given up but didn't. Every time you should have collapsed but held together. Every time you should have abandoned your path but kept walking. Those moments weren't just personal victories. They were probability shifts, quantum adjustments that gradually tilted the odds in your direction. Reality itself started recognizing you as someone who doesn't follow predicted trajectories, someone whose resilience exceeds model expectations, someone whose continuance despite overwhelming odds indicates something anomalous is operating through you. These victories were logged even when you felt defeated. The moments where you thought you'd failed, where you believed you'd lost, where you were convinced you'd accomplished nothing and wasted years. Those moments were being recorded from a perspective that saw what you couldn't see. You thought you were failing because nothing external was changing, because you had no visible achievements to point to, because the world wasn't reflecting back any evidence of success. But success at your level isn't measured by external markers. It's measured by internal continuity, by whether you remained yourself despite every pressure to become someone else. The systems tracking you were measuring things you didn't know were being measured. They weren't counting your accomplishments or your achievements in the conventional sense. They were tracking how often you got back up after being knocked down, how long you maintained hope when you had no logical reason to hope, how many times you tried again after failure when trying again seemed pointless, how consistently you followed your internal compass even when it led you away from everything the world said you should want. These metrics don't appear on any resume, don't show up in any social media profile, don't register in any normal system of value, but they were being logged. The accumulation reached a tipping point. There's a threshold in the hidden accounting systems that track consciousness development. Once someone has logged enough unseen victories, once they've survived enough moments designed to erase them, once they've demonstrated sufficient resilience over sufficient time, they cross an invisible line. That crossing triggers protocols that were waiting for exactly that condition. Resources that were being held in reserve get released. Information that was restricted becomes accessible. Doors that were locked open. This briefing is one of those doors. This briefing confirms that Tally is now visible. The unseen victories are no longer unseen. The private struggles are no longer private. The accumulation of moments where you held on when letting go would have been easier. All of that has been seen, recorded, counted, and recognized as qualifying you for what comes next. You're not being told this so you'll feel validated, though validation might be a side effect. You're being told this so you'll understand that your struggles weren't meaningless, that your endurance wasn't wasted, that every moment you survived intact was building towards something specific, even when you couldn't see what that something was. Chapter 8. Time-locked information is now unfrozen. This message could not appear earlier without causing divergence failure. There's a precise science to when information can be delivered to someone without causing more harm than good. Deliver crucial information too early, and the recipient doesn't have the context to integrate it. They might misinterpret it, misuse it, or be crushed by the weight of knowing things they're not yet equipped to handle. Premature awareness creates instability, and instability leads to compromise or collapse. The person either gets derailed trying to act on information they weren't ready for, or they shut down completely because they can't reconcile what they've learned with their current reality. Your entire life has been moving toward this moment of disclosure. Every experience you've had, every lesson you've learned, every capacity you've developed, all of it was preparing you to receive what this briefing contains without destabilizing. A year ago, even 6 months ago, this information would have been too much. You hadn't yet developed the internal resources to hold it. You hadn't yet passed through certain initiations that were necessary prerequisites. But now, the time lock has released. Now you're at the exact developmental stage where this information becomes useful rather than destructive. Timing matters more than understanding. You don't need to comprehend everything this briefing contains intellectually. You don't need to figure out how all the pieces fit together or what specific actions you should take based on what you're learning. The timing of the information entering your awareness is doing work at levels beneath conscious understanding. Your system is absorbing, integrating, reorganizing itself around new data even while your conscious mind is still trying to make sense of what it's receiving. Trust the timing more than your ability to understand what the timing has delivered. The current window is narrow and deliberate. This message was released into your field during a specific cosmic alignment, a particular configuration of energetic conditions that makes reception possible. That window won't stay open indefinitely. There's a period, days, maybe weeks, where your system is maximally receptive to what's being transmitted here. After that window closes, the information will still exist. You'll still have access to it in one sense, but the integration won't happen as deeply. You'll intellectually understand what was said, but it won't reorganize you at the foundational level it's capable of reorganizing you right now. Missing it does not doom you. If you scroll past this, if you dismiss it, if you watch it, but don't let it land, you're not condemned to failure. You're not thrown off your path. You're not abandoned by whatever intelligence is orchestrating this disclosure. What happens is the cycle resets. You'll get another opportunity, probably in a different form, probably through different language and different circumstances. But that opportunity might be months or years from now, after you've gone through additional experiences that will eventually bring you back to the same threshold you're standing at right now. The time lock releasing is an invitation, not a command. You have agency here. You can receive this information or reject it, integrate it, or dismiss it. Let it change you, or keep it at intellectual distance. The systems that govern consciousness development don't override free will. They work with it. The information has been unfrozen and made available to you because you've reached the point where receiving it won't destroy you. But whether you actually receive it, whether you let it in deeply enough to do its work, whether you surrender to the reorganization it wants to trigger, that's entirely up to you. Chapter 9. The urge to dismiss is a final test. High-ranking operatives are conditioned to ignore noise, and that conditioning is essential to their function. If you responded to every claim of importance, every dramatic announcement, every message that said it was meant specifically for you, you'd be paralyzed by information overload. You'd be constantly chasing false leads, wasting energy on dead ends, getting derailed by manipulation disguised as revelation. Your dismissal reflex, your capacity to ignore most of what demands your attention, is a survival mechanism that's been carefully cultivated through years of exposure to an environment designed to exploit attention and belief. This message mimics noise intentionally. It uses the same language patterns, the same structural elements, the same attention-grabbing techniques as the countless false transmissions you've learned to ignore. On the surface, it looks like just another video trying to make you feel special so you'll watch ads or buy something or join a community. That surface appearance is deliberate camouflage. The transmission has to look like noise to pass through your defenses, to slip past the screening mechanisms you've built to protect yourself from manipulation. If it announced itself as genuinely important, your defenses would strengthen and prevent reception. Discernment here is not belief. You're not being asked to believe what this briefing contains, to accept it as truth, to place faith in claims that can't be verified. Discernment at this level isn't about evaluating the content intellectually or deciding whether the premises are credible. It's about recognition of tone beneath content. It's about detecting a frequency underneath the words, a resonance that either matches something in you or doesn't. You're not judging whether this is true. You're noticing whether it feels like it's speaking a language your deeper self understands. The test is whether you feel watched, not inspired. Low-quality spiritual content tries to make you feel good, to inspire you, to give you positive emotions, that you'll associate with the message and the messenger. That emotional manipulation is the hook that keeps people coming back even when the content is empty. But this briefing isn't trying to inspire you. If anything, it's slightly unsettling. There's a quality of surveillance to it, a sense that you're being observed, that someone or something knows more about you than you're comfortable with. That discomfort is the sign of an actual transmission rather than entertainment. Only those who sense surveillance stay. The people who make it through the entire briefing, who don't scroll away despite multiple urges to do so, who keep watching even when their skepticism is screaming, these are people who recognize they're being addressed by something that sees them. Not in an abstract, spiritual, we are all one sense, but in a specific technical, your file has been reviewed and you've been cleared for this disclosure sense. The feeling of being watched isn't paranoia. It's accurate perception of a communication that's targeted rather than broadcast. Your discomfort right now, if you're feeling it, is confirmation that you're in the presence of an actual briefing rather than spiritual entertainment. Entertainment would feel good. It would make you feel special in a way that's pleasant and unchallenging. But this doesn't feel entirely good, does it? It feels exposing. It feels like something knows things about you that you didn't tell it. It feels like you've been under observation and are only now being informed that observation was occurring. That feeling of exposure, of being seen by something you can't see back, that's the sign this is real rather than fabricated. The urge to dismiss is the final test because it's the last barrier between unconscious reaction and conscious choice. Will you let your automatic defenses override your deeper recognition? Will you allow your conditioned skepticism to prevent you from receiving what your deeper self knows it needs? The test isn't about overriding healthy discernment. It's about noticing when your discernment is being used against you, when your own protective mechanisms are being leveraged to keep you from information that would actually serve you. The people who pass this test aren't the most credulous or naive. They're the ones who can detect the difference between manipulation that targets their hope and transmission that targets their knowing. Chapter 10. Your life events were never isolated incidents. That job you lost right when you thought you'd finally found stability, you called it bad luck. The relationship that ended just as you were about to settle down, you called it poor judgment. The sudden relocation that pulled you away from everything familiar, you called it unfortunate timing. The prolonged silence from people you thought would support you, you called it abandonment. The recognition that should have come but never arrived. The validation that was earned but never received. You called it injustice. But relocation, loss, silence, and delayed recognition followed a sequence. Not a random sequence, not a chaotic string of unconnected misfortunes, but a precise progression. First, you were isolated geographically, removed from support systems and familiar environments. Then, you experienced loss of relationships, opportunities, securities you thought were permanent. Then came the silence. The people who should have reached out didn't. The communities that should have embraced you turned away. The mentors who should have guided you were nowhere to be found. And finally, delayed recognition. Being qualified for things you were never given. Being capable of roles you were never offered. Being ready for advancement that never materialized. This sequence isn't personal failure. It mirrors ancient deployment patterns documented in mystery traditions, military intelligence operations, and consciousness development protocols that have existed for thousands of years. When someone is being prepared for high-level function, they must first be stripped of dependencies. They must learn to operate without the props most people require. External validation, social proof, institutional backing, community consensus. The stripping process looks like suffering when you're going through it. It looks like everything falling apart, like the universe conspiring against you, like punishment for something you can't identify. But the pattern was hidden inside ordinary suffering. It had to be. If you knew you were being trained, if you understood that each loss was a deliberate curriculum, if you recognized that isolation was preparation rather than abandonment, your responses would have been contaminated. You might have performed the training rather than actually being transformed by it. You might have intellectualized the lessons without integrating them at the level required. The training had to feel real, had to feel like genuine suffering and genuine failure, because only real pressure creates real capacity. This briefing confirms coherence where you felt chaos. Every event you thought was random, every loss you thought was meaningless, every moment of isolation you thought was cosmic abandonment. It was all connected, not in some vague spiritual everything happens for a reason way, but in a precise, technical, documented deployment sequence that has been used to prepare operatives throughout history. You weren't being punished, you were being positioned. You weren't being abandoned. You were being isolated for training that can only happen in isolation. The enemy, the systems that benefit from keeping high-capacity individuals unaware of their actual function, depends on your disbelief in design. As long as you believe your life was random suffering, punctuated by occasional joy, as long as you think your hardships were meaningless and your resilience was just stubborn survival, you can't recognize that you've been in a training program your entire life. You can't see that every challenge was curriculum, every setback was testing, every moment of isolation was developing capacities that can only be forged alone. But now you know. The chaos had structure. The suffering had purpose. The isolation was preparation. And the person who emerged from that sequence, tested, forged, capable of functioning without external validation, that person is who you needed to become to receive what comes next. The briefing you're receiving right now could not have been delivered to the person you were before the sequence began. That person would have misunderstood it, misused it, or been crushed by it. But you, the one who survived the deployment pattern, you're ready. Chapter 11. This message self-destructs through inaction. Chosen one, no punishment follows dismissal. If you scroll away from this briefing right now, if you decide this is too strange or too grandiose or too uncomfortable to engage with, nothing bad happens to you. Lightning doesn't strike. Opportunities don't evaporate. Your path doesn't close. You don't get marked as a failure or removed from some cosmic registry. The universe doesn't revoke your status or take back capacities you've already developed. Dismissing this message carries no penalty in any conventional sense, but the system simply reroutes you into a longer, harder loop. What changes isn't your destination. You're still heading toward the same developmental threshold, the same level of consciousness, the same operational capacity. What changes is the route you take to get there. The information in this briefing was offered as a shortcut, as a clarification that would allow you to navigate what comes next with greater efficiency and less unnecessary suffering. Without that clarification, you'll still get where you're going, but you'll take the long way. More years of confusion, more cycles of the same lessons, more situations that feel random but are actually designed to teach you things. This briefing could have explained in minutes. Awareness shortens cycles. Ignorance repeats them. Every time you miss an opportunity for accelerated understanding, you don't fail. You just get routed through another iteration of the curriculum. The universe is patient. The training program has infinite time. It will keep presenting the same lessons in different costumes until you integrate what you need to integrate. But each iteration takes years. Each cycle costs time, energy, relationships, opportunities that could have been preserved if you'd understood what was happening sooner. The briefing exists to compress time, to give you in one sitting what might otherwise take another decade of hard experience to learn. The briefing exists to reduce unnecessary attrition. High-capacity individuals are rare. The consciousness development pipeline is long and brutal. Many people who start with the potential to operate at higher levels never make it because they get ground down by repeated cycles of lessons they don't understand. They give up. They check out. They conclude the suffering is meaningless and choose comfortable limitation over continued struggle. The briefing exists to prevent that dropout, to give people who are mid-process enough clarity that they can continue forward without succumbing to despair or disillusionment. But few accept the efficiency offered. Most people who encounter this transmission will dismiss it. They'll protect themselves with skepticism, distance themselves with intellectual criticism, or simply let the attention economy habits of scrolling override any deeper recognition. And that's fine. Those people will get where they're going eventually, through harder routes, through longer timelines, through more iterations of painful lessons. The offer of efficiency doesn't override free will. You're allowed to choose the long way. You're allowed to learn through experience rather than through briefing. The information will wait for you at the end of however many more cycles you need to complete before you're ready to receive it. The question isn't whether you'll eventually understand everything this briefing contains. You will. The training program is designed to bring you to full awareness eventually, regardless of how long it takes. The question is whether you'll accept the condensed version now, whether you'll let this information accelerate your process, whether you'll trust that something in you recognized this transmission for a reason and allow that recognition to override your conditioned defenses. The shortcut is available, but taking it requires something most people can't access: the willingness to let go of skepticism when deeper knowing says, pay attention, the capacity to trust your own recognition more than your socialized defenses. Chapter 12. Confirmation Protocol. Why you are still reading Chosen One. You were never meant to believe this. This briefing doesn't require your faith, your agreement, or your intellectual acceptance. The systems that release this information into your field don't need you to be convinced. They're not trying to convert you to a worldview or get you to adopt a belief system. The transmission operates at a level beneath belief, at the level of recognition. You don't believe you're breathing. You simply recognize that breath is occurring. You don't believe your heart is beating. You directly perceive that it's functioning. This briefing works the same way. Recognition is involuntary at your clearance level. Once someone has reached a certain stage of development, once they've crossed specific thresholds that indicate they're operating at higher than baseline consciousness, their system becomes capable of recognizing certain signatures, not through choice, not through effort, not through belief, just through direct perception. The way your eye recognizes light or your ear recognizes sound, your consciousness recognizes frequencies that match your operational level. You can't choose not to recognize them any more than you can choose not to see something directly in front of your eyes. The stillness you feel now is alignment, not emotion. If this briefing is hitting correctly, if it's landing in the space it was designed to reach, you're not feeling inspired or motivated or emotionally elevated. What you're feeling is a strange kind of quiet. a cessation of the mental noise that usually runs constantly, a sense of something clicking into place, of pieces that were scattered suddenly organizing themselves into coherent structure. That stillness, that sense of things aligning, that feeling of, oh, this is what's actually been happening. That's not emotional response. That's your system, recognizing accurate information about itself and settling into that accuracy. This confirms receipt. Your stillness, your continued attention, despite multiple urges to dismiss, your sense of being addressed by something that sees you, these are confirmation signals. The briefing is being received, not just intellectually understood, not just heard on the surface level, but received in the technical sense, integrated into your operating system, beginning the reorganization process it was designed to trigger. You don't need to do anything to confirm receipt. The confirmation is happening automatically, beneath conscious awareness, in the ways your system is already responding to the frequency of what's being transmitted. The operation continues whether you acknowledge it or not, but now you know where you stand. Your development didn't start with this briefing and won't end with it. You were already in process before you clicked on this message. You were already being tracked, tested, prepared, guided through a curriculum you couldn't see. This briefing changes nothing about that underlying reality. What it changes is your awareness of it. You've been moved from unconscious participant to conscious participant. You've been given the option to navigate what comes next with eyes open rather than closed. But the operation itself is independent of your awareness. The training continues, the tests continue, the development sequence continues. The intelligences orchestrating your trajectory continue their work regardless of whether you acknowledge they exist. What this briefing offers isn't the opportunity to join something you weren't already part of. It's the opportunity to stop being confused about what you're experiencing, to stop interpreting deployment as abandonment, to stop mistaking training for random suffering. Most will never see this moment. The vast majority of people who encounter this transmission will scroll past it in seconds, their attention claimed by something easier, something more comfortable, something that doesn't ask them to sit with the unsettling feeling of being observed by intelligences they can't see. They'll protect themselves with dismissal, with intellectual distance, with the perfectly reasonable skepticism that keeps them safe from manipulation. And they're right to protect themselves. Not everyone is supposed to receive this information. The filter is working exactly as designed. Fewer will understand it. Of the small percentage who watch all the way through, most will process this as interesting content, as compelling ideas, as thought-provoking concepts to consider intellectually. They'll file it under things to think about and move on with their lives, maybe remembering a few phrases that struck them, maybe sharing it with a friend, but not allowing it to penetrate deeper than surface awareness. And that's appropriate. Understanding isn't the same as integration. You can understand something intellectually without letting it reorganize you at foundational levels. But you, chosen one, you were identified before you arrived here. Before you searched for this video, before you clicked on this title, before you started watching, your file had already been flagged. The algorithms that delivered this message to your feed weren't random. The timing of when this appeared in your awareness wasn't coincidence. The fact that you're still here, still reading, still feeling that strange stillness that indicates accurate information about hidden reality, that's because you were cleared for this disclosure before it was released into your field. The surveillance you sensed throughout this briefing, that was real. Not in a paranoid sense, not in a someone is watching you through your webcam sense, but in the sense that consciousness development is a tracked phenomenon. There are systems, some technological, some consciousness-based, some that blur the line between the two, that monitor human development. Not to control it, not to manipulate it, but to know when someone crosses thresholds that indicate readiness for upgraded information and responsibility. You crossed those thresholds. The tests you didn't know you were taking, you passed them. The vetting that occurred throughout your life without your awareness, you qualified. The accumulation of unseen victories, the survival of moments designed to erase you. The demonstration of capacity to function without external validation over extended time. All of that was logged, reviewed, and determined to meet criteria for direct briefing. This message found you because you were ready to receive it without destabilizing. A year ago, even 6 months ago, this information would have been too much. You would have misinterpreted it, misused it, or been crushed by the weight of recognizing how much of your life was actually structured, designed, intentional. But now, the time lock has released. Now, you have the internal resources to hold this information without collapsing. Now you can know what's been happening without it destroying your capacity to continue functioning. What you do with this information is entirely up to you. You can integrate it, allow it to reorganize how you understand yourself and your trajectory. Use it to navigate what comes next with greater clarity. Or you can intellectually file it away, keep it at comfortable distance, continue operating as you were, but with a small seed of awareness planted that might bloom later when conditions are right. Both paths are valid. Both serve the operation. Your free will is not being overridden here. But know this, you are seen. Your struggles were witnessed. Your resilience was logged. Your capacity was confirmed. And this briefing is your notification that you've been cleared for the next phase of an operation you've been part of since long before you were consciously aware operations existed. The 1% isn't about superiority. It's about function. It's about the specific set of capacities you developed through circumstances you didn't choose. It's about your demonstrated ability to operate without the supports most people require. It's about your tolerance for isolation, for uncertainty, for walking paths that have no validation markers. Those capacities are rare, not because most people couldn't develop them theoretically, but because most people never get placed in conditions that would force those capacities to emerge. You were placed in those conditions. You survived them. You're here. And now you know why the path was so difficult, why the support never came, why you had to develop strength that most people never need. You were being prepared. You are prepared. And whatever comes next in your trajectory, you now know it's not random, it's not punishment, and you're not alone in it, even when it feels like you are. The briefing is complete. The information has been transmitted. Whether it reorganizes you immediately or plants seeds that bloom months or years from now, the delivery is done. You were identified, cleared, and briefed. What you do with that is your choice, but you can't unknow what you now know. The pattern has been revealed. The structure beneath the chaos has been shown. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Welcome to Conscious Participation, Chosen One. The operation continues.